Fortuna was passing with 69.79% of the vote. Measure B, the Arcata Public Housing Measure, was passing at 77.12%. Measure A, a proposed tax to support conservation in Arcata parks and green spaces, is passing as well at 78.75%. Measure D, a bond initiative for South Bay School District, is passing with 59.29%. That one needed a 55% approval rate in order to pass. Measure I, a county measure to allow for more public housing in Humboldt, is passing at 67.76%. And lastly, Measure E, the Trinidad sales tax, is ahead with 73.81% for it and 26.19% against. Joining us tonight for the interview is Eric V. Kirk, a well-known local politico and attorney whose passion and knowledge for the process and subject is well known. Thanks for taking the time to be with us tonight, Eric.
Good evening.
So like I said, thanks for joining us. Taking a look at the results both locally and nationally. Let's start local, I guess. What are your initial thoughts on what we've seen?
Well, I mean, right here in Eureka, once again, the left, what we call the left, seems to have won resoundingly. And in fact, in Ward 4, it was the two perceived leftists. Scott Bauer came in first, Liza Welch came in second. Together, they made up over 60% of the vote in Ward 4. Ward 4 is supposed to be one of the more conservative wards. In the other, Katie Moulton came out ahead, and very convincingly, the closest one being Dot Yeager-Wentworth, who was considerably below. It would be curious to see if, now that we have ranked choice voting, because as you noted, that also passed, as to how that would have affected Ward 2, because there are a couple of more conservative candidates that, if they were put together, would exceed Katie Moulton's, and who knows where the fourth candidate would have gone, or who everybody's second or third choices would have been. But it's quite possible, though maybe not probable, that a different result might have happened in that one with ranked choice.
Can you quickly describe for our viewers how exactly that'll work when people go in to vote for a city council member? How will the ranked choice voting be applied, and what does that mean?
Sure. I mean, what it basically means is it's a measure, among other things, to try to make sure that more than 50% choose somebody. So if you have the initial vote, everybody puts their first choice, second choice, third choice. If you have a vote and nobody gets 50%, and nobody did in either of these elections, either of these wards, then the lowest person, the one who has the least number of votes, all of their second choices get counted in. And if somebody still doesn't have a majority, then I think in one case it would have been the fourth one, the other one would have been the third one. Then those candidates, voters' second choices come in until somebody is over 50%.
So that's basically, they call it instant runoff, and that sounds like that's why.
Similar to an instant runoff, although an instant runoff, what would happen is that there would only be one round. You would have the top two, and then all of the others would be counted at once.
Okay.
But it's very similar.
Interesting. A little bit before the show, we were talking about the ideological split of the council. When I was a Greenhorn at the Times Standard, there was a pretty pitched battle between the left and the right. There was Sherry Arkley and Nancy Fleming, and then Peter LaValle came in and had this sort of revolutionary takeover of the council. And is that still happening? Or, I mean, it seems like the council has stabilized kind of center-left, and there isn't as much of a rightward competitor. Is that right?
Almost overwhelmingly. In 2018, all three progressive candidates basically blew their opposition out of the water. Only Leslie Castellano came up with slightly less than 50%. The others, all, including the mayoral candidate, all won over 50%, and even Leslie's wasn't close. And this is a far cry from a decade ago, when conservatives held on to the majority, when progressives, as you want to call them, took the majority. I think it was 2014 or 2016. I'm forgetting exactly which. There really hadn't been a progressive majority by our definitions, our current definitions, possibly in over 100 years, when there was a socialist majority on the city council. Right around the time of World War I. Since then, I mean, everything being relative, it might have changed, but this is really new for Eureka. And I don't know what the conservatives will do about it. I thought last time they were kind of being punished for really holding a negative campaign, focused on needles and whether or not to make H&I boulevards or leave them as boulevards, or do something else with them. They seem to they didn't take as negative an approach this time around, but same results.
Yeah. An interesting division also locally is the north and south split. Like, I mean, obviously nationally, this left and right thing has become vehement and bitter. I wonder if the fact that, Fortuna, Rio Dell, Scotia, if their political attitudes, which often are to the right, and Eureka and Arcata and McKinleyville, which are to the left, if that's going to cause any rifts. Do you see that happening?
Well, we've had those rifts before, and sometimes it's even more complicated than that. You go further to the Garberville and all the hills area there, they tend to be left-wing because they tend to be hippies, but they tend to have a more libertarian view than the Arcata left, so to speak. And there was a rift between them such that Estelle Fennell was elected on the Hum CPR on a coalition between hippies, back to the land hippies, and other business interests in Fortuna. That coalition seems to have held this time around to give Estelle Fennell another win. And how do you define her politics? It's not easy.
Yeah, I mean, she's a former KMUD alum like yourself, so
she was
obviously right. Best and brightest to come from KMUD.
Newscaster, hippie central,
yeah.
And sometimes what is left and right locally isn't necessarily nationally. Nationally, she would probably, I'm sure she supported Biden, for instance. I'm sure she would, she's pro-choice and all of those positions. Locally, sometimes it's a little different in how you define what's left and right. And, because sometimes it's issues of unions versus environmentalists and some of those dynamics have played out in these. And Humboldt County is fascinating. We're purple, maybe leaning blue these days. I believe that that Biden got about 2/3 of the vote here, and Donald Trump got less than 30%, at least so far. We'll see what happens. We only have the first post-election report. There'll probably be one or two more before the final vote.
What I saw that was pretty consistent also was that the same vote for Jim Wood and for Huffman down across basically up and down the ticket, that vote spread was consistent, basically 2/3, 1/3. Which I thought was pretty fascinating.
It is, and that probably says something about at least the Democratic and Republican divide in Humboldt County at this time. It's always been Democratic majority, but a lot of times you had the sort of the blue dog or the more conservative Democrats that would sometimes vote with Republicans. And but I think we're just so polarized national now. There isn't a lot of crossover between the parties like there used to be, at least not for the most part.
Now, in terms of the local ballot measures and even the state ones, what do you think were the most important, and anything about those leap out about you just on the surface?
Well, the one that's still pending and is behind now, but we still have about 30% of the votes to count, was Prop 15, which was going to partially roll back Prop 13 in basically excluding commercial properties worth more than $3 million. With some complex details in there from Prop 13, which means that it would be assessed at market value, bring more money, and but people were concerned about the negative impacts of that. It's right now about 49 to 51. That could change because we don't know who. It would depend on where the missing votes are. If they're from the Bay Area and Los Angeles, it'll probably pass. If they're mostly from the outer lying areas, maybe not so much.
Yeah, for the Central Valley, that's pretty conservative.
Yeah, we also had Prop 22, which is the big one, which was whether or not what are considered to be independent contractors working for Uber and other similar gig economies would have to be treated as employees, given benefits, workers' compensation, and the like. And a lot of money was spent by Uber, Lyft, and the other companies to defeat it. And it looks like it went down to defeat. And then we had probation. What we were going to, pardon me, not probation, bail. We're going to end bail. That didn't happen. But on the other hand, the police unions and prison guard unions tried to pass a measure that, because we've been forced to take people out of jail, we passed some measures that made it harder for certain crimes to go to prison. The police unions tried to reverse that by having certain crimes be parole exempt, and went down in flames, which surprised me because California used to pass law and order measures like that routinely. It shows you how big we are in. But one of the biggest surprises to me is that there was an attempt to reinstate affirmative action in the universities and with the public contracts. Believe it was Prop 16, and it didn't pass. It went down. And what's very interesting is it wasn't all white voters who voted against it. It was a sizable number of people of color who believe in racism. I mean, they're being interviewed and they believe there's systemic racism, but don't believe that affirmative action, as at least has been practiced in California in the past, is a good way to remedy it. That was probably the biggest surprise to me.
Yeah, that is fascinating. You know, when I was at the Times Standard also, we had some discussions about the practicality of the initiative system as a whole. You mentioned Prop 13, and you know, there's a lot of issues with unanticipated consequences, where people, voters who are subjected to billions and billions of dollars of advertising get pushed one way or the other by a special interest group to vote for a given initiative. But they don't really understand how that might play out over time in terms of the budget or local revenue, that sort of thing. You know, we tended to be on the editorial board a little bit skeptical of some initiatives for that reason. Do you see any unanticipated consequences with some of these initiatives that may have passed this time around?
Well, for one thing, and I want just to say about Prop 13, the reason it passed was that property taxes were going through the roof and working class people were going to lose their homes. They could not pay the property taxes that they were going. My parents were, you know, organized the Peace and Freedom Party in California. They were anti-war, you know, socialist, red diaper babies and all of that. They voted for it because they said we would have lost our house. What was disappointing to them is they said about 10 years later, they're developed in California politics where, you know, if there was one proposition that they didn't like, that a less extreme one would be offered, you know, and whichever one got the most votes, if they both passed, would be the one to pass. And we even had an instance where there were 4 for insurance reforms, and you know, passed by 4 different interest groups and the rest. Had that been a practice or kind of understood in 1978, there might have been a less extreme alternative to Prop 13, because it really is extreme. It is really hard to get revenue in California, and our schools suffered almost immediately. And I remember the layoffs. 2 of my favorite teachers got laid off right then and there. I was in the 8th grade. And so, yeah, I also think in California, it's a little too easy to make a constitutional amendment. And our Constitution is just crazy because every time we pass constitutional amendments that overturn others. I think it should be 2/3 or at least a 55% majority to do that. But we haven't gotten around to that. But yes, there can be negative consequences that you don't know about, but that can be true of any law too. Yeah. It's just, but there's certain laws that probably should be passed through a legislative process where you got different people testifying, bringing information in, different interests, you know, and hopefully the legislatures do their job. I mean, Prop 24, which was a privacy initiative, was 60 pages long. I'm an attorney and I couldn't make sense of it. I don't know, it passed. I don't know what its effect is going to be. And, you know, because there's different contradictory things within it. It's convoluted. Most people don't understand it. I'm not even sure if the writers completely understand it, because I almost get the feeling like different people were writing different parts of it. Yeah. And yet it passed and we got to deal with it. You know, so, yeah.
It seems like there needs to be, at least to some degree, some holistic perspective where you actually monitor for those kinds of things. But how would you do that, and what would the mechanism be? That's
I don't know. I sort of think that if you can't fit all but the basic boilerplate stuff onto 1 or 2 pages, it shouldn't be on the ballot. That's my feeling.
Yeah. You know, I have one more big question. It's a big one, though. As I mentioned in the intro, division across the country on both sides is rampant. And both sides sort of endowed the intent of the other, and increasingly have begun to think that they're, you know, they characterize them as evil. There's very little middle ground. that can be found. What do you think we can do to fix that, if anything? I mean, especially as we're moving into possibly a White House that's Democratic, a Senate that's Republican, and a House that's slightly Democratic, less so than it was this last term. How do we get anything done and don't fall back into that trap where McConnell, refuses to work with the Democratic president and it's a power struggle?
I don't know. I was never a fan of President Ronald Reagan, but he and Tip O'Neill, who was the House leader at that point in time, they had lunch like once a month. They had their political battles, and then they got along, and they were able to actually work out a lot of bipartisan stuff. A lot of people don't realize Ronald Reagan raised taxes 12 times, mostly in the second term. But they were able to work some things out, and we just don't have that anymore. Nixon signed into law some of the most radical environmental and job protection stuff that the country's ever seen. Stuff that probably wouldn't even be passed by Democrats these days. So it's just, I don't know how we get by it. There's definitely two nations right now. We've got a complete split. It's almost like 50-50. And even today, there's a big difference in perception as to what's happening with the counting of the election. One side thinking it's all fraud, anything that was after the election, counted after the election, shouldn't be counted, and the other side that thinks they're nuts, and believing propaganda. You hear things like, well, nobody can vote for Trump unless they're a racist, and Trump. I mean, it is a divide. We've even seen it in this county with the caravan of hundreds of vehicles coming from Fortuna to McKinleyville, and people thinking that they needed to counter.
People I knew were in that caravan. Eric, we are out of time. Thank you so much for that conversation. It was enlightening, and I'd love to have you back in the future if you're willing.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. We'll talk to you again soon.
Okay.
We'll be back after this short message.
Year after year, PBS has been bringing you the news you trust.
We care about the things that are going to affect the lives of each and every American.
The in-depth analysis you need.
Climate change, healthcare, immigration.
And the true stories that have to be told.
We're a place that people can come not just to find out what happened, but why it matters.
It's all thanks to the support of viewers like you. Thank you. And stay tuned to America's most trusted network.
This month in Passport, your on-demand library of the best of PBS.
I've known the family for years. I never, ever dreamt it would end like this.
Across the globe, islands are home to some of the most remarkable animals and extraordinary cultures on the planet.
I'm Scott Yu. Come with me to uncover how a country boy became the most influential composer of all time.
These and other shows are available with Passport. Become a member of this PBS station. Sign in and start streaming today.
I know every single person in that last commercial, by the way. Humboldt County Deputy Health Officer Josh Ennis addressed the most recent spike in COVID numbers this week and spoke to the likelihood of another county shutdown to stop the spread.
The zip code data comes directly from a state database called CalReady. As cases make their way into that state database and through the investigation process, as well as some of the efforts that the state pursues, there is data deduplication, there is reassigning of cases to home jurisdictions based upon address of record, and because of things like this occurring, the numbers can bounce around. They can go up, they can go down, and so this is entirely separate from some of the stuff we look at the local level with our local database. And so because of this, acknowledging those limitations, it really can't be used as a day-to-day measure of where there are hotspots. And again, I would just reiterate, it says nothing about where the exposure occurred. It just tells you where they live.
In response to a question about shifting case numbers in southern Humboldt over the last week, Ennis described why such numbers on the county's website, which originate with the state, are not all that effective for determining the source of a hotspot.
The symptoms, I think, have not necessarily changed. It's just we've developed a much better understanding that these symptoms have a huge range of what they can cause or what people can experience as part of the illness. People can be completely asymptomatic, or they can have what we initially thought was primarily a respiratory illness. We've seen everything in between. We know 80% of people do well, are fine, no symptoms, mild symptoms, and the other 20% get much sicker. We just have a better understanding. I don't think that it's changed at all.
I think we got our thoughts off a little bit, but this last one will be, I think, about the likelihood of another shutdown to stop the spread in Humboldt County.
I don't think I could speak for what's going to happen across the country. I know that our county is definitely seeing an uptick as a result of this third wave across the country, and a majority of the cases are related to travel to states with lots of disease. I think one thing we learned early on is that flipping the switch between lockdown and fully open is not practical. It's extremely difficult for people to implement, and so, you know, I think what we're trying to facilitate is more of kind of a graded response, and that's reflected in the tier system that we see that the state has rolled out. So there are kind of intermediate baby steps, so to speak, rather than just flipping a complete switch and going into total lockdown, which, you know, no one really wants.
Eureka Mayor Susan Seaman this week described how a recent film shoot in Old Town had people dancing in the streets. It was a welcome relief from election-related tension, she said.
And while we may be experiencing anxiety as we wait for the results from the national election, we did get to enjoy a break from that in Old Town yesterday, where there was literally dancing in the streets as an independent feature film crew filmed a musical scene for the movie The Sky is Everywhere. The economic impact from productions like this make our local film commission a valuable asset to the community. And even if you only saw it on the Lost Coast Outpost, since the area was closed off due to strict COVID-19 protocols that keep the community and film crew safe, the chance to snap out of our election haze for a minute to witness the filmmaking was a fun diversion none of us knew we needed. This season, I want to encourage you to shop local. It's not only a way to provide a thoughtful and unique gift to your friends and family, but it's also a gift to our friends who own and work in local businesses. This year, we ask you to choose Humboldt and shop Eureka. Businesses, use the hashtag in your post, #ChooseHumboldt, #ShopEureka, to make sure we can find all of those great gifts you have available.
A 27-year-old Arcata man was arrested this week for allegedly attempting to murder another man who was reportedly sleeping on the street. According to Eureka Police, on September 24th at about 2:50 a.m., officers with the Eureka Police Department responded to West 3rd and Commercial Streets on report of a stabbing that had just occurred. A 50-year-old male victim was taken to the hospital by ambulance with multiple stab wounds. A suspect was described as fleeing in an older white Ford Ranger. Based on surveillance in the area and extensive follow-up investigation, detectives were eventually able to identify the suspect as Tori Tazi Parker Mamea, 27, of Arcata. On November 4th, detectives arrested Mamea at his Arcata home. He was booked into the Humboldt County Correctional Facility on suspicion of attempted murder. According to police, the victim was asleep on the street when the incident occurred. He received multiple stab wounds, but is now in stable condition and recovering. The motive behind the attack is unclear. EPD credits area businesses for providing surveillance footage as well as witnesses who called police, provided aid, and gave detailed suspect descriptions. That's it for tonight's show. For further election updates, results, COVID numbers, and more, visit humboldtgov.org. Our COVID numbers have been spiking lately, much like the rest of the country. While we're better off than most areas, it's still a cause for concern. So please remember to wear a mask and be safe. Stay tuned, stay informed.